Are we live? Are we live on YouTube?
We should post the Zoom link, Chris.
Hey, everybody.
I thought I did.
Oh, did you? Good. Okay.
Or maybe I didn't. I guess I can fix that. Well, the YouTubes are still waiting, it says. Oh, it's doing stuff. Excellent.
All right.
Stop.
Alright, we're gonna chitty chat as usual for the first 5 minutes to see if people want to join, show up. Jeff,
Excellent.
Jeff, are you checking LinkedIn? Are we
I am checking.
streaming? Are people watching?
Hi, people.
I think we're live. Hopefully people can hear us too.
Yeah, people of the internets, talk back.
Right? Is there you've disabled your comments in here.
I
or
did?
is that just the box I'm in?
Okay, where is there?
I don't know if it's just the box I'm in, like the panelist box or whatever.
Oh, comments on Zoom?
Yeah, I think it's on Zoom. They may be disabled, Chris.
Yeah, you can comment on LinkedIn though. So blow us up over there.
Yes.
Awesome.
Send hearts. Whenever I give an interview and at the end they ask the usual questions like, where should people follow you? My standard response is, please don't. That's creepy.
Yes. I was just gonna say, sending the hearts, man. That's coming from a man. I'm not gonna ask people to send me hearts. I get plenty of all kinds of DMs with hearts and stuff. So, yeah, if you want, I can share some with you.
That's okay. I'm good. All right. I'm gonna post the link to the interwebs. Copy invite link. Link has been copied.
But everybody wants to see my shirt. Yeah,
Disruptor.
that's right. That's right.
My superpower is disruption.
It is. You got to know how to do a lot of things to pull it off and achieve positive change. Otherwise, you're just making trouble.
All right.
We're just gonna talk to ourselves, I guess.
Awesome.
All right. Well, gonna play our intro for good measure and otherwise. You probably won't be able to hear that, but people should be able to see that. Again, if anybody's watching. YBYR intro coming up. Mr. Jokish, what are we doing today?
Hey, Chris. And hello, everyone. Welcome to Your Bites, Your Rights, a weekly interdisciplinary discussion and podcast about data ownership, digital rights, and your privacy. In today's episode, number 33, we shine a light on our creepy financial surveillance state. In U.S. v. Miller, SCOTUS ruling back in 1974, I think, SCOTUS ruled that bank records were not private papers. They were not the property of Mr. Miller, but instead owned by the banks as part of necessary business operations. At the time, Justice Powell found no expectation of privacy for a customer of the bank when they do business through the bank, as checks, deposit slips, and other paperwork are elements of commercial transactions. This decision and several more buttressed what became known as SCOTUS's third-party doctrine, which holds that people who voluntarily give information to third parties, such as banks, phone companies, internet service providers, and email servers, have no reasonable expectation of privacy in that information. This might have seemed okay when only a small percentage of our lives were online. Seems sort of crazy now when you realize that it gives government warrantless access to virtually every single thing we do. Unless you want to live under a rock, the government can really see virtually everything about us. So that's there. And then another thing happened, and that is that the government passed what's called the Bank Secrecy Act to protect citizens, and by giving law enforcement the power to search citizens' private bank records without obtaining a warrant. So on top of the ability to do this through the third party doctrine, they have a specific law that allows them to access a lot of this information. And the Supreme Court upheld those warrantless searches as constitutional under the Fourth Amendment. So with that sort of as an intro, I'm Jeff Jokish, founder of Privacy Plan, vocal data privacy researcher. I live at the intersection of privacy and data about privacy. I'm here with my co-host, Christian K. Meyer, a managing partner at Sustain Capital. Chris runs a venture firm focused on blockchain solutions. As a former software developer and lawyer, he's been working on data rights and the future of money and recreating reality consensus. How do we do that, Chris?
Well, the answer is technology, not lawyering. Hence, I'm mostly a technologist, not really a lawyer. Mostly trying to fix misguided laws that address legacy technologies. I think at the core, that's what we're looking at, right? Because if you think about it, if you had some technology that didn't provide this easy dragnet approach to all your financial transactions, it would be much harder, right? So if there was just some paper record that you had to subpoena and actually physically hand over, and that was the way that access would be provided, it would create a lot more friction, and that's actually what we need. And that's readily available with new technologies, and unfortunately we don't talk enough about that, and there's by and large little awareness about that, and that's something that we need to fix. I think the awareness that we have now, technologies that are more efficient and protect people's data rights, that are also more effective in actually catching people, quote unquote, that want to do something nefarious using the legacy financial system, which I wouldn't recommend using in the first place, but that's a different topic for another day. But thankfully, since I retired from the law 22 years ago, we got Heidi here to weigh in on legal aspects of that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I think you're right. You don't need another lawyer. You need a disruptor. You need a lawyer that is not bound by the masters of enterprise to come in with original ideas and solutions and to bring about positive change we want to see in the area, taking into account all of the interests of the stakeholders and then balancing them. The issue of financial data, yes, we have an issue with Miller, and then the other standard that we could have used was CATS, and CATS would be a reasonable person standard. Is it reasonable for someone to have an expectation of privacy here? That would have been a better way to go about it on a foundational level. But Congress got another chance to look at privacy and financial transactions when they passed FACTA, the amendment to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. They basically said you don't have any constitutionally protected right of privacy. Justice Powell was right about that. But they said you don't have an expectation of privacy in these financial transactions. And then they went further because the lobbying interest at the time saw the promise of the innovation of data. And in the meantime, Google and Sergey Brin was just starting to work out the algorithms and see the power of data as well. So they quickly moved to get what's called the reseller exception for data brokers. So that just opened up an unchecked market for everybody to take all of this data, including your financial data. Because now they no longer had to respect your rights as the individual that the data was about. Because under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you had the right to know what data the credit reporting agency had on you, the right to correct it if it's wrong, and the right to sue them if they don't. And you no longer have any of those rights when it comes to this data, which has created the burgeoning, ridiculous economy that we have. The IEB says that this information economy is now 8% of our GDP. That's a ludicrous amount of money to be spent on targeted advertising just to annoy the shit out of us. We're going to spend that much money? Like, what else could we do with that money? So that was in 2002, and I was in law school writing papers about it, shouting from every corner on Boston, and nobody cared. And so we're still there today, but it's gotten so much worse because technology's gotten to the point to where the Bank Secrecy Act is pretty much the wild card for enterprises. You know, they're like, as long as we satisfy the obligations of the Bank Secrecy Act, or we say we're not looking at credit histories, then we don't have to follow the Fair Credit Reporting Act, then people are using your data for whatever purpose they want, including the government. And to avoid warrants, they're going and buying the data from data brokers so they don't have to get a warrant. So, I mean, we really don't have any protection from the corporate interests or the government when it comes to our own data being used against us. And it's kind of a small thing to say, this is the battle to retake what we want, but it really is. And if we don't do something about it now before we go down this road and include every single crypto token and start chasing down the DAOs, it's never going to get any better. And you're right, tech debt is a huge issue at the bank. I am not hearing the bank talk to me about what needs to happen with technology. They need to sit down for a minute. Okay, they just got their cyber updated under Graham Leach like 3 weeks ago. So I'm not hearing anything on technological advances from banks other than ways to screw people in their rights. So the creepiness factor is through the roof on financial transactions. What do we do about it? I say we remove the reseller exception on FACTA and make everybody in the data stream have to follow the same rules when it comes to data for individuals. And you're still going to have AML and all of the other protections that we have, KYC and things like that, to watch all of the flows of the traffic. Because overall, those systems prove to be somewhat effective. And when they're not effective, they're learning experiences for us to figure out how and why. The biggest loss in the chain of effectiveness there is cooperation with other governments. Not everybody wants to surveil their people or can surveil their people the way we do. So if we do take back some of the surveillance powers we have, we will lose some of our abilities to do some of that. And that's almost putting Congress in an impossible position. Yeah. So I'm not sure where to go with this, but I know that the current direction that we're going in right now, we don't even know which agency is going to be looking over crypto. I know which one I think should. Right? Chris, I bet you have an opinion as well.
Well, none of them, because this is technology, right? So you don't make laws for technology, you make rules for people, right? So that's a constant, in my mind, conflation, being an ex-lawyer, so to speak, as in they take on the mantle of law, they're putting the label law on there, but laws are things that you discover that exist, that have a cause and effect without you writing anything, right? So what they're really talking about rules. So the difference here is that any software, any technology for that matter, adheres to the laws of reality, and that's all it can do. So you can't ignore gravity if you're building some technology. You can't implement rules that won't work in software, and that's what you're doing. And those create the real laws. And then rules address the people, the behavior of people that want to engage with these technologies. And that's always a distinction that I might make a priori before I discuss anything. It's like you want to make rules for people, and you want to make rules for people within your jurisdiction. So step one, yes. Do you even have the capacity to do so? Who empowered you? What laws empowered you to do that? And by and large, I think those agencies don't have that power, right? So you need to make a proper law go through the proper procedure, but this kind of making policy by enforcement, or whatever the latest term for that is, that to me breaks the rule of law that we're living under. When whoever's in the position to do enforcement just change the rules and publishes a guidance paper, and that's the new definition of whatever it is. Doesn't matter what it is, inflation or something else. But the larger point there that I haven't seen, maybe I didn't look enough, anybody make is, it's really a prior restraint from free speech, because how I allocate my capital is actually more an expression of self a lot of times than my speech, right? Whether or not that is a donation to a cause that I support, that I don't appreciate other people knowing of and sharing. And as we know, as of late, that has been an issue where governments think, well, you shouldn't be supporting this particular cause because we don't like it. And that smells very much like dictatorship, authoritarian government, and suppression of free speech, right?
Well, if you were a political action committee, you wouldn't have those problems. You would be treated completely differently, because your speech would be unlimited for the amount of money that you spend, and nobody is tracking because you have no duty to report. So if you were a political action committee, you would have more privacy than you do as an individual right now. So ask Peter Thiel. He knows all about it. So anyway. Right? He's trying to buy 2 Senate seats right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could
That's
share.
Arizona, Arizona and Ohio, and they're not doing well. Hopefully, they're not doing well. But yeah, there's plenty of opportunity for you to have your speech not tracked. It's just, are you wealthy enough, and are you using the right evasive measures that are not for a reasonable person? No, perhaps he's for the wealthy.
Yeah, so the other day, speaking of that, we had an in-depth discussion about this particular topic, and so I went through the trouble of figuring out what is the amount that would fall under that limit that was established in 1970 if it was inflation adjusted. Guess to venture how much it is, Heidi?
What, the $600?
Yeah, if you adjust, no, not the $600, the $10,000 that were
Oh, the
originally
10,000?
yeah.
Gosh, did they update that?
No,
I don't know.
no, they did not. But if they were which obviously it should be inflation adjusted.
Yeah, it didn't sound like they would update that. It sounds like a
Yeah.
ridiculously low number. They're just going to leave it there, and it's going to be a burden for everybody. Yeah.
Right. So no, it would be way above $72,000. And so point there being is to put this. I always like to put this in reference, right? So in terms of what did $72,000 buy you in 1970? It bought you a lot. The average car purchase was $3,500.
Yeah, like wasn't a house like $16,000 back then or something? Yeah.
Oh yeah, not so long ago actually you could buy houses in Nevada for $30,000. So you could have just bought a house with cash and no one ever needed to know, which by default, why should someone have the right to know? Because we're doing it kind of backwards, in my opinion, as in all your private transactions are public for some reason, and all the public transactions are more or less private, right? So funds that are flowing from the legacy financial service providers into the coffers of Key Street employees and whoever got paid.
It's a lot of investigative work to follow the money. I mean, it really is a lot of work because it is hidden so well behind so many different powerful structures that are designed to do that. So when I do something like that for the last political action committee that I put up, Targeted Victory. And Targeted Victory is one that's employed by the GOP. Now, the RNC already says they have over 3,000 data points on every voter. I'm not a Republican. I didn't give them any data points. They have 3,000 data points on me. And so they go and hire Targeted Victory, who has all the rest of the information in real time because it's constantly updated. And then they use that and churn it through and target their marketing to squeeze into the voter pool every single vote and dollar that they can get out of it. It's hundreds of millions of dollars that they're spending on this. And I saw a video presentation of the CEO of this organization, pitching this to other businesses. And it just blows my mind. It's really a business that privacy has no concern to them whatsoever. And they could be making dog food, and people are just one more ingredient in the recipe that they're churning out to get the end result that they want. It boggles my mind that on a human level you can't understand what you're doing here.
Yeah.
So
and I always like to add at that point in time, it's not really about privacy. If someone has that much of an information pool on you, it's no longer about privacy. It's about your agency, right? So if I know a lot more about you than you at any given point in time, I can manipulate you without you necessarily knowing that, right? I can push content.
I don't know 3,000 things about me, do you?
Right? No, and specifically in the moment, right? You require really this moment-to-moment awareness what you're doing, and that's needless to say how all, let's call it impulse buy and otherwise unwise decision come about. I'll form a particular opinion because I'm in a particular state at that very moment, right? So because these ads are actually not only targeted based on the individual, but they're also targeted towards particular locations and times. So there's certain times of the day where these quote-unquote influencing mechanisms will simply work better, right? Because your willpower is depleted on Friday afternoon after 3 p.m. and you're more susceptible to listen to arguments that you otherwise would entirely ignore because the first statement is already a logical fallacy, right? But
and then you make a donation, they track that financial contribution, then you start getting coupons for the Bass Pro Shop. Come on, man. It's snowballing. It's going nowhere good.
Oh, yeah, that's an experiment I would like to do that I have never done. It's like an identity theft scenario where you contribute to under a different person's name to a particular action group.
Yeah, well, I did have somebody threaten to sign me up for birthday cards from Trump.
Birthday cards? Okay.
Birthday card. Yeah, if you go to Trump's site, don't do it. But you can go to his site, and if you put in all the information, they in a donation, they will send birthday cards, printed birthday cards with a signature to wish you a happy birthday.
Oh, yeah, I have a sticker for that. Everything that I get as snail mail, it just gets a sticker returned to sender. It's nothing that I need or want.
Yeah, but somebody threatened to give them my email, and I'm like, I can't imagine the emails I would get being on that list. I don't want to see what I would see on that list. It would that would make me angry every day. So,
right.
I want to stay and hear the rest of this, but I'm gonna have to watch the replay. So
sure. And Jeff, you're muted, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that.
This was.
Glad to have you, Heidi. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for chiming in.
Take care. Chris, I wanted to talk a little bit about legislative intent. Often when SCOTUS makes a ruling, they say, they're interpreting the Constitution or some law or something, and then, Congress will pass another law to try to, rectify the situation. And then you would think that the court would then, sort of change the way they're thinking. So when the court made the Miller ruling, Congress came back a couple of years later and passed the Right to Financial Privacy Act, which sounds like what it is, right? It's supposed to give us a whole bunch of additional rights to financial privacy. It does have a bunch of loopholes in it, but obviously the legislative intent there was to give Americans financial privacy, but didn't change much of anything about what SCOTUS continued to rule on not giving any Americans, financial privacy. But of course, the Right to Financial Privacy Act does exempt all of the BSA stuff. And as Nick talked about, a couple of days ago in that other meeting we had, it really doesn't give us much financial privacy. Doesn't seem like anything anybody does really influences this financial privacy. I think we have to sort of go back to what you were talking about. Changes in technology may be the only way to solve this for us.
Yeah, and maybe what I'm thinking actually is that this latest deluge of regulatory action indicates that these agencies kind of starting to understand that there's technology around the corner that will actually put them into a position where they can just deputize the legacy financial service providers to provide these dragnet approaches to what I would just call warrantless surveillance. Right? There's no need from a technical perspective to attach your PII to you buying something at Walmart and then sharing it with 4.5 intermediaries at that point in time. And
we should probably share with our listeners one of the new things that just came right this last month or so. I'm trying to pull it up here. What was that? The Biden administration proposed that banks and other non-bank financial institutions report on any bank account that transacted more than $600. I think they got a bunch of pushback, and so now that is something like $10,000. And it's inflows and outflows, I think, over a year, but maybe also if the transactions on a daily basis are over $10,000. It's a little bit complicated, so we have to actually look that up. But this is not the Bank Surveillance Act, the Bank Secrecy Act, and not the Suspicious Activity Reports, but just any kind of transactions. So this is like complicated, right? So now they're essentially saying that it doesn't matter whether it's suspicious, it doesn't matter whether it's a transaction that's above $5,000 or $10,000, right? But just if it's a transaction, they want to report it to some unnamed government agency, apparently the IRS, maybe other agencies as well. That's pretty freaking scary.
Yeah, every time you go to dinner, you have to share that and share everybody who was at that dinner, even if you just met them. I can't buy you. Sorry, bought a bottle of wine. Let's make sure that we split this across a couple of different checks here.
Well, I think I probably explained that ruling pretty poorly. Maybe Nick can explain that a hell of a lot better.
No, Jeff, you were spot on, and thank you both for having me on. You were spot on, and I love the way that you mentioned that there was that intent behind the Right to Financial Privacy Act, this thing that you can put on all the newspaper titles, all the news headlines, that here we had this problem in the Supreme Court with the Miller case, where clearly there's a very fundamental issue with how we're looking at privacy. And here we have what appears to be a clear solution, but then you make exceptions for everyone under the sun, all the places where it really matters to have our information collected. All of a sudden, it doesn't quite look like we have a right to financial privacy. We have something written on paper that calls itself that, but we don't get it anytime that it matters.
Yes.
Well, and it's much more than that, right? Because it's not privacy. You're really giving up agency at that point in time. And to me, it always sounds like this is a prior restraint. So now I have to think about how I express myself when I allocate my discretionary income, or, well, not even that, my income in general. So before I make a decision whether or not to donate to a particular cause or buy a certain item, I have to think, okay, do I want this to be public, right? That particular decision. Do I want this to be shared with all these different agencies, or anybody for that matter? Because as far as I can tell, anybody who wants access at this point in time has access.
Well, that's something that, Christian, we've talked about before that you've really opened my eyes to, is we don't question how this information shared in all these unnecessary places that it's shared. And in the 70s, you had members of the Supreme Court worried about the fact that it reveals your political leanings, where you live, where you go to work, and all these other factors of who we are, all this private information that we are, if it gets out there, we're very likely to start censoring ourselves, start changing the way we spend money, because I know a lot of people are concerned about their social media data getting out there. In a lot of ways, I believe that our financial data is actually more indicative of who we really are, because that's putting our money where our mouth is.
100%. Yeah. If like one thing is I tweet about something saying I like this particular cause. Another thing altogether, I never said anything, but I sent $5,000 to a particular cause. That's a much bigger statement, right? And I don't even know why this is not utterly obvious and should be squashed, because that's like our most fundamental right. That's like these are the fundamentals of our democracy, right? That we just let milli-vanilli be evaded, right? Is that the wrong term? Sorry, English is my third language, so you get it.
We should introduce Nick to our audience, Chris. This is Nick Anthony. He's a policy analyst from the Cato Institute. Are there other honorifics we should mention?
No, that captures it all. I don't need any grand welcome, but thank you, Jeff. It's mostly just doing work here on financial privacy, cryptocurrencies, and the use of money generally in society, how we get it from here to there and everywhere in between. So this is a topic that's very dear to my heart and something that I've been focusing on for quite a while. So it's as I've mentioned to you both, it's great fun to be able to talk with you on it.
Yeah. I mean, as of today, this interpretation of KYC, which even is in the regulation in quotes, is a requirement that's supposed to only be levied on FSPs, so financial service providers maintaining account-based systems, right? And so the point there being is, in our vision of the future of technologies regulating your personal identifiable data, but also regulating the way you have access to your assets, account-based systems should no longer play a role. So what I mean by that specifically, so an account-based system, to simplify this massively for people to understand, that is kind of the idea that a bank gives you, let's call it a username and password. You access your account and then you do something with your account statement, or you send funds and so forth. So larger point there being, though, is there's actually two things that are going on there. That particular institution then maintains custody of your funds, and not even custody, like typically the way it works when you're doing a quote-unquote deposit from a legal perspective, you're actually extending an interest-free loan to that commercial bank. But then the other part, which actually, and most people don't realize that, is more nefarious and more critical, is the fact that this particular entity now has custody over personal identifiable data, largely for no particular reason. And I say that because 99.5%, and probably more likely 99.9% of people using their checking account, their demand deposit account on a daily basis, obviously doing something entirely innocuous, right? So they're just paying for their mortgage, they're just making their car payments, they're just buying groceries. However, just by the mere fact that these intermediaries are being deputized by government agencies, and there we should always make clear who these individuals are really, because governments are functions of societies. Governments don't do anything by themselves. We should make sure that we always identify and kind of put faces out there, can kind of create a social media profile for anybody interfering with democracy. So who is anybody who is just interfering with people's life in that matter should be identified and basically get a scratch mark. Okay, this particular individual, that particular agency just requested the anonymization of this particular account data. What's my point? So my point is, it's not only a violation of our basic fundamental constitutional rights, but also human rights, and it's super inefficient and costly. So the average number, I believe, was something just for like monitoring the employees at the bank from a compliance perspective is just $10,000 a year. But then this actually inflates every single transaction that you're doing for no particular reason, right? Because these are costs, needless to say, that in some shape or form are always being passed on. The idea, by the way, that we put this label of something like sales tax on things and whatnot, there's all this kind of window dressing idea, as in, well, there is no such thing as a business tax, right? What the government agency did is they made a particular private company a tax collector. And so that's like a multiplication of inefficiencies. Anyway, end of this particular rant. As you guys know, I'm prone to rants because I just find it inexplicable still, after living here for 22 years, that people are not outraged on a daily basis, right? Specifically now, where the currency is being debased at a higher and higher frequency, and which is entirely unnecessary, but it's then multiplied. Anyway, so these legacy systems exert a toll on everybody that people should realize, of about at least 24% of everything that you earn ultimately. That's being just taken away from you for utterly no reason whatsoever.
And I want to stress that point just for a moment, that it really is for largely no reason whatsoever. Not just all the information that you mentioned that's collected, just unnecessarily all these identifiers that are in our transactions that really do not need to be. But even if you scale that back to times where banks think something's suspicious going on, or it's a large amount of money, we're talking about millions of reports filed each year on Americans, largely for just using their own money. And out of these millions of reports, it's some estimates put it at a percentage, 1%, 2 percentage points, or 1% or 2% of those millions of reports are actually worth following up on for law enforcement. And to have our financial privacy violated so routinely, I mean, as such a common aspect of the financial sector, and have no return on it, to have the bad guys aren't being stopped, the mass crime rings aren't really being shut down. You have a few anecdotes here and there of those cases, but we're not seeing it in mass. We're certainly not seeing it to justify the millions of reports or the countless data that's unnecessarily reported.
Yeah. And actually, we need to do the opposite. We need to establish the data that's being generated and then abused by other governments to then penalize people for things like disagreeing with the government's opinion, right? So as in, most people are not in that luxurious situation where they actually even can disagree with the government, even verbally. We have very much the luxury of being able to openly say that something is inefficient. A lot of people around the world don't get that opportunity. So point there being, though, is if, when, where you can weaponize the financial system to then identify these individuals or people that support them, you're literally putting them in danger, in physical harm. And I don't think we either qualify or quantify this at this particular point in time. There's no balance. There's no way of us knowing how many people are being physically harmed on a daily basis by us allowing this totalitarian mechanism to exist at all. Because I always do these kind of alternative thought experiments, as in, okay, what if we didn't have database solutions, digital technologies? Let's teleport ourselves back to 1955, before the invention of database solutions. What would you need to do in order to get all this information that you're now getting at the push of a button, right? So you would have to write a letter, send it to Bank of No Return, and then Bank of No Return in due time would mail a snail mail back with some account information and identifiers and like photocopies. And point there being is, let's reintroduce that friction, right? So the technology is supposed to serve human beings first and foremost. It's not supposed to serve mechanisms that make the life of those who want to spy on other people for no particular reason easier, right? It's supposed to serve me first and foremost. If it doesn't serve me, stop using it, right? So, okay, I won't buy a smartphone, I won't buy a computer. I do all my transactions in cash and see how you like that. Anyhow, but the point is really that we actually have the technologies to simulate this now. We can do exactly that using technologies, and that's ultimately the point that we need to get across to anybody in Congress, to anybody at the regulatory agencies, to make them understand, hey, not only are you endangering people, but these technologies that are readily available right now to you and everybody, they could actually achieve these goals that you report to have much more efficient and without harming any innocent bystanders in the meantime, because all of us are essentially collateral damage at this point in time, right? So there's a data breach in the United States roughly once an hour, costing every company $6.4 million on average. And again, these are all costs that are being absorbed by the taxpayer, by the consumer. That includes government agencies, and that includes private individuals, and that includes corporations. But it's all legacy technology. That's why more forward-looking nations actually demand specifically to implement, they call it blockchain-based solutions. As you guys know, this is not technically really the right description of it, but let's call it more secure solutions that are cryptographically based and that don't have the same shortcomings that database solutions have. Guys, we need to come up with a sign for when I start to rant, because otherwise I'm just going to talk the rest of the hour, even though I basically talked yesterday all day about these topics again, related topics. But Nick, I think you got a chance to look of our rudimentary library here, and that's something kind of want to put out there and start linking to and get more peer review on, and then make it useful. And then the point there being is, I think, particularly in the realm that we are involved with, so decentralized software solutions, disruptive finance solutions, a lot of times this is heavily engineering driven, with lawyering coming in sort of after the fact. And I think what's really needed is a solid understanding of engineers understanding certain legal concepts.
I really couldn't agree more there, because there is a constant disconnect, unfortunately. I'd say it even goes a little further between, you have people who are looking at this from an engineering perspective, people that are looking at this from a legal perspective, people looking at this from an economics perspective, and then even the political perspective. And there's obviously a few more in there, but the biggest problem, and this is something I think we've talked about before, is that you have all these groups talking past each other. In the most innocent cases, it's because of the lingo and the language of the land for these different industries. But even in the worst cases, you have just people not wanting to get their feet wet in these other fields of research. And I mean, I can understand that a little bit. You spend all this time becoming an expert in the field. No one wants to go back to kindergarten and be at the base of the ocean. But when we're talking about such an expansive position we are, as far as technology and human capability goes, I think it's really important for people to be a little more willing to get a vast understanding and an interdisciplinary understanding, whether that's through collaborating with others or learning. It just has to be done. Otherwise, we're going to get systems that are only built with one real eye in mind. I mean, it's kind of like prescribing 2D solutions for when you need something in the third dimension. If you don't even acknowledge that the third dimension can exist, it's just never going to work when you put it in practice.
Yeah, well, and you need to have an understanding of kind of the topology and layout before you start building these solutions. So the point here being specifically, a lot of times they will build these solutions, then kind of get approval afterwards. But you need to be very conscientious of what are the real world economic outcomes you want to achieve and how you're going to achieve that. What are the nation states legacy enforcement mechanisms today? And what are the actual obstacles? What is the actual friction that exists in the legacy system? Because by and large, obviously, none of these regulations originally had the intent to make things harder for the individual, presumably, because even the people that are enforcing that would presumably not like that if that happened to them, i.e. it's like some congressman trying to send $12,000 to his daughter for whatever reason, and it doesn't show up the next day, even though the daughter needs it to, whatever it is, come home from another country and is just stranded there. But because the fact that there is that scrutiny on there, a transaction can be held up by a number of entities, and oftentimes you might not even know what entities that is and turn to. So you'll ask your bank, it's like, well, I sent my daughter $12,000 because she needs to get on an emergency flight back home, but it didn't get there, and they will tell you, yeah, we don't know where it is either. Like this is like a real example, right? So this is, and that's like both an externality of legacy systems and then multiplied by legacy regulations that is bolted onto these legacy technologies.
Well, that's one of the big problems, is I don't think people realize what the state of their financial privacy is, because they don't get those answers. They don't get to see these things until it's too late, until you're on the other side of it. And then oftentimes you go and you ask the bank, what happened? What's going on here? And they either can't tell you because maybe it's out of their hands, or they can't tell you simply because there's many cases where it's just simply illegal for them to do so. If they thought that that was a suspicious activity, that $12,000 was moving, then they can't tell you that they stopped it for that reason. And so when you have people that don't experience this trouble with their financial privacy, when they can't be told that they're in trouble with their financial activity, you get this broad veil over the system where everyone thinks, oh, everything's fine. Everything behind the scenes, I didn't see anything happen. I didn't hear about anything happening. Nothing went wrong. And you get this kind of veil and this illusion of privacy when it really couldn't be further from the truth, unfortunately. And that's why it's so important to have, shows like this are a perfect example of why it's so important to talk about these issues openly, to create a dialogue with the broader public, and to really just let people know things may appear to be smooth on the surface, but when you put your head under the water, it can be a very different story, and there's a lot of changes that need to happen as we're on this kind of new frontier of what's going to be possible with technology.
Yeah, privacy is less important when your life is perfect and nobody dislikes you, right? When that changes, your need for privacy can change pretty damn rapidly. But people don't think that way. They walk around with their head a little bit in the clouds.
And that's something that I think is so important when we think about the U.S. exporting its regulatory policy. A bunch of the reports that came out from the Department of Justice and Treasury were actively saying that they need to export the U.S. regulatory code as far as financial surveillance goes, and they want to send it overseas through what they refer to as bilateral engagement, and through the Financial Action Task Force, or the FATF. And let's be very kind and just take the heroic assumption that the regulatory system is perfect in the United States, and that we have these perfect individuals enforcing it, nothing goes wrong. That's not the case when you take it overseas for, like you said, the folks who are not living where they can be in ignorance and bliss. Those are folks that in some countries, the financial system can be cut off at a moment's notice, and by giving those governments those powers and having it approved by the U.S. because it's what the U.S. does, I don't think people really realize what that means and how much power is going into other people's hands. Because case in point, you had in Russia, Putin's opponents were having their bank accounts frozen for not much more than being opponents. In the South Sudan, you had protesters having their accounts frozen. In China as well, you had people who were speaking out against the government see then their bank accounts frozen. And these are all tools that exist in the U.S. system. It's not that far from home. We're just extremely lucky that we're in a system that has some more checks and balances. But it's not off the table by any means, because the world all saw that Canada just this year was freezing the bank accounts of protesters to try to stop unrest. And just to put that in scale, for the Cato Institute's Human Freedom Index, Canada is ranked as number 6, at least before this happened. Is ranked at number 6. The United States, on the other hand, I believe is 15. So we're in a very lucky state that all of these things exist and worse consequences are not coming about, but not everyone can say that. And I worry that even our luck is in a passing moment. It could very much change. If it can, it's one thing to say it's happening in Russia or China. If it's happening in Canada, it is very much on the table to happen in the United States as well. And I just hope that people can see that that's on the table before they're the center of the target.
Yeah, if a hacker can take your money out of a bank account, if a bank can make a mistake and freeze your account, yeah, it's not very far-fetched to think that an official could decide to freeze your account for some reason, justified or not, in America. It's around the corner. It's going to happen.
So,
And it was. I'm sorry, go.
So who should we model? It's like Sweden, Norway, Finland.
Sadly, I think it is always nice to have a model to strive for. I'm personally of the thought that at the broadest sense, we need to model really what the United States has already crafted through the Constitution. I think if we return to that model, we could be much better off. I also, some folks will agree. I've seen many testimonies from folks in the law enforcement sector saying that it's too hard to get a warrant, or it takes too much time to get a warrant. I respectfully disagree with that. It's not very hard to get a warrant when you line up all your ducks in a row. We've seen that time and time again, and I think that at the very least would be a great system to model off of, to just put some better constraints in place for what the government can freely do and freely go after. Now, when it comes to going after, or rather, when it comes to fixing the problem of all of these stranded identifiers out there that really don't need to be there, that we don't need to really be giving up just to purchase an apple at a bodega, I think there is a much wider solution that needs to come in mind, and I'm not quite sure what the ultimate fix is for that, but I think the technological advances we're seeing now that have allowed to cut out intermediaries are going to be part of that solution. It's going to be a very uphill battle to get there.
Yeah, I mean, what was particularly disappointing is when the Netherlands, I mean, that's an assumption here that I still have to validate, but might have reacted to the Financial Actions Task Force request and arrested a developer, a coder in the Netherlands, right, which ranks pretty high on the Freedom Index. And presumably they arrested him for the crime of providing code to people, to providing software to people, right? So that to me is just the definition of fascism, right? If you're punishing people for publishing software code, it's no different than speech.
You know, it is. Sorry, I was going to say, are there countries that have more financial privacy? And do they have a bigger problem with terrorism, with drug transactions, with child pornography, with all the evils that we're supposedly combating?
I can't say that they are having those same or worse evils for it. But that is a question that I see a lot. And one thing that I often respond with that is just the fact that that's kind of where I come from, with the fact that we should have some sort of constraint on law enforcement, but I'm not saying to completely eliminate them from the puzzle. I think that it should be wound down as well, but when you have things like a warrant process, you can still go after bad actors. It's just no longer a free-for-all. It's no longer this data sea that folks get to swim through like they're Scrooge McDuck in a basement filled with SAR reports. And I think that's one thing that folks that are more privacy minded would benefit from making that clear. I know there's folks that want to completely take law enforcement off the table, make it no option. That's fine, but for more kind of restrained or piecemeal solutions, I think it should be made clear and stressed that law enforcement isn't off the table just because people have privacy. It's this really misunderstood fact that you have this lawless world just because people have privacy, regardless of if it's financial, personal, your emails, your telephone. Just because people have a level of privacy or a greater level of privacy does not mean we're going to open up any nation to an Armageddon. And we see that pure enough in all the countries that have even worse financial privacy than the United States, because they often still have crime that exists. And many times we're seeing it on worse levels than the United States. So even though they've tried to achieve this almost matrix level surveillance, it's they're no Agent Smith. They're not everywhere and they're not stopping everything. We just have people getting more creative. So it's kind of this unfortunate approach of, I think it's understandable for especially politicians to want zero crime to exist. I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's tenable for any policy.
Yeah.
And so some can exist, and I think they need to acknowledge that having a better level of privacy is not going to mean a ton is going to exist.
I think it's the opposite, right? Really, if you give people their rights, by and large, they're actually going to turn out to be good actors, right? But it's kind of the assumption that you make to begin with, essentially assuming everybody is bad as a starting point, which that is not true, right? People by default just want to live their lives, right? They just want to go to work. They just want to live somewhere. And
Well, on a meta level, isn't it that's really what it is, right? So you're saying we want the police, law enforcement, to identify the bad actors and then go after them, rather than looking at all the data and trying to find the bad actors and then go after them. Now, I can see some advantages being a data guy, right? I'd love to look at all the data and find all those cool things, right? And identify, oh, wait a second, that's a guy over here, right? We should look at him.
yeah. But I mean, we obviously have lots and lots of examples from history where quote unquote governments collected lots and lots of data on people, and we know what the outcome was, right? So what it resulted in. So, and so that was a hallmark of East Germany, right? So there was, I forgot what the number was. There was an exorbitant amount of people employed just to spy on their neighbors and just to keep meticulous records of which neighbor is buying what and going where at what time. That is still being cleaned up today. That still people are researching, okay, who was affected by that, which was half of the country. So not only is this dehumanizing, it's unproductive, it's unworthy of this human experience, which is like coming to a rapid close here as we are talking, right? As in our fledgling startup called the Human Species is on a very bad trajectory as is, without these kind of self-inflicted wounds of people wasting their time and other people's time and resources on something that simply doesn't have to exist to begin with, right? So this is really, really frustrating. But at the end of the day, I think we are coming to the conclusion that technology is the answer. Technology can't be uninvented. It exists. It will prevail. Whether or not certain individuals in certain government positions want to put labels on there, it's at the end of the day, technology is just that. It fulfills certain functions. The use cases are always up to the individual, and by and large, my assumption is the individual is good. Right? Unless you're put in a certain position and unless there's something like mentally wrong with you, you don't go around killing people and committing crime. That's usually a result of that particular individual being pushed into a certain scenario where this is the only way that I can survive. I have to commit crime, right? The alternative is rather obvious, right? provide people with education, provide the technologies that make their life better. That's the frustrating part, right? So ultimately, technology must serve humans. Everything should get cheaper every year, and unfortunately it doesn't because of mismanagement, largely by bureaucrats that think that they can make laws, when in fact they can only make rules that address people's behavior and their ability to interact with technologies that are supposed to make their life better. Regularly using the hammer to push in their own heads rather than putting nails in the wall, like I like to say.
Any last words, Nick, before we wrap up here?
My only passing message is just, it is so important that folks remember, just because you don't see the fire doesn't mean it's not there. Unfortunately, financial privacy is a very hard thing to keep your eyes on, but as nice as it can be in the United States, there's a lot of room for improvement, and a lot of accountability is needed in our system before we're in a truly good place in this respect.
And we must be the exemplar, right? So we
Yes.
must be the nation that is doing that and leading that, because other countries are taking their clues from us, right? And right now we are setting just very, very, very bad examples, right? That is very, very
Great
frustrating.
summary, Chris. Yeah. All right, well, let's wrap it up. I want to thank our two guests, Nick Anthony from the Cato Institute and Heidi Sass, a data protection lawyer. This has been episode 33 of Your Bytes, Your Rights, where we shine a light on creepy financial surveillance in the United States. Join us next week for episode 34, title to be determined. But we are going to be announcing a slew of new titles, hopefully 4 or 5 different episodes for the coming weeks. And so we hope you'll join us next week and the following weeks.
Yes.
Have a great.
And if you're listening to that, what I'm interested in is specifically perma-web solutions. So the idea you're creating data that exists forever and what that means specifically, because there's solutions around for that.
Yeah, let's do that next week, Chris.
Okay.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Nick. Talk to you soon.